Kia ora. This is my video on plant and animal responses, a big overview of the key concepts in hopefully 10 short minutes. So it's divided into 4 different parts. There's orientation in space, that plants and animals might respond to something by moving themselves. They respond with timing of the activities. They respond to other species, and they have responses to members of the same species. You need to know the types of the names of the different responses and to be able to explain how they work and then how this helps the animal, because they keep doing them because there is an advantage and advantageous things get passed on to the next generation. So first of all, orientation in space. Now there's lots of words in this one. There's the animal responses, taxis and kinesis, and then there's the plant responses, tropisms and nastic responses. The two that begin with T are the ones that are directional, so they'll go towards or away from something. So you can think of taxis and tropism as being towards or away. The other two, kinesis is a bit of a sort of random change in the speed of movement, and a nastic response is just one type of response no matter the direction of the stimulus or the response. And the abiotic factors they're responding to can be things like photo meaning light, geo or gravi meaning gravity, hydro is water, chemo is chemicals, and that includes food because food is made of chemicals, and thigmo is touch. So I'll go through them one by one. So taxis to start with, I think of taxis being like the word taxi. If you hop on a taxi, you're going to make it go in a direction. You're going to say, go towards this place, to the shopping mall, to the party, to whatever the good thing is. Or you might direct it to go in a certain direction to get you away from something. Like you want to get away from home or away from school or away from the bad place. An example of this would be positive chemotaxis. So that would be something where the positive means you're moving towards it. So it's like you moving towards your kitchen pantry because you're an animal and you're going towards it, and it's chemo because it's food is what you're trying to get. A kinesis is still an animal movement, but it's a little bit harder to understand because it's not moving in a certain direction. It's more to do with the speed of the movement, and the greater the stimulus, the more the speed that will increase. So there's 2 kinds, ortho and clinokinesis. So I'm moving over here and we're drawn to the circles and we've got some animals. So there's good places to be with good conditions and bad places where the conditions aren't so good. So orthokinesis, I use this little guy here. So that is the speed of movement. So if it's in a place with the stimulus that's bad, it doesn't know where this good place is. It can't go directly there. But if it just speeds up its movement and tries to go faster, then it's going to get out of that bad place faster than if it's going slowly. And there's a chance it will by chance end up in a good place. And when it gets to the place with the good conditions, it's going to slow down, which is great because then it spends longer in the good place. Clinokinesis is not so much just the speed of movement, but the rate of turning. So in a place with bad conditions, the organism is going to turn often in the hope that a turn will lead it towards a good place over here. If it's in a good place, it won't turn so much, which means it will hopefully stay in the good place. Does that make sense? So turning can get you out of a bad place, and you do less turning in the good place because you want to stay there, so you stay in the same direction. And the rate of movement will be fast in the bad place and slow in the good place because you want to stay in the good place. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense for ortho and clino. For the plants, we've got tropisms and nasties. And I think of tropism as being like tropism, tropical forest, lots of things growing there. And so it does mean growth in a plant, and it does have a direction, so it can grow towards or away from something. I have an example of thigmotropism that I'll show you on my next video with a plant in my house. So thigmo is touch, so it can grow towards something it touches. They might grow away from something they touch. That would be negative thigmotropism. The roots will tend to grow, will do positive gravitropism. Now with gravitropism, you want to make sure that you remember that towards gravity, so downwards is positive, and away from gravity, going upwards, would be negative gravitropism. And our leaves are going to grow towards the sunlight, and I'll show you that outside as well. A nasty is this one that's tricky here because again this is not a growth response, but it's a much quicker response that plants can do. And they do it by moving water, and but it's not caused by something coming from a certain direction, and it's not a movement that's in a certain direction, it's just a particular response. So some leaves, if they get touched somewhere, anywhere, they will droop or close up as a response, and that's a protective thing to hopefully maybe stop them getting eaten. And some flowers will close up at night time when there's no light or bees or birds around, and they'll open up in the daylight, and they're just moving water between cells, and that can make those parts of the plant move, but they're not doing it in a particular direction. Great, so that's all the movements, the small movements, and now there's a little bit more for orientation space, which is the bigger movement, so migration, homing, and then how they do that with navigation. So migration is when we have a whole population of animals, and this time they're going to move from a good place to another good place in a group, and then back again. And often they'll do that every year. Some species just do it once. But there's things in both places that are useful for the animal. So it might be in this place, there's lots of food, and then when the weather turns not so good in that place, they can go to another place that's nice and warm, and they might raise their young in a different place. There is a big cost in energy from moving from one place to another. It's a long, long way to go usually to get different conditions. And so you think, well, why would they bother doing that? But that must be that overall it's beneficial to move from place to place and have better weather and better food in each place to make it worthwhile them migrating. It's a little bit different to homing. Homing is when they move, they might move out of their home environment to go get food, and then they can find their way back home again at the end of each day or after they've foraged for some food. Or if they got blown off course somewhere, they would be able to find their way back to their home base if they end up somewhere unfamiliar. And they can do that using landmarks, so big blocks of land, or even under the sea there's also landmarks, but they're bits of rock under the water. Just don't say that sea creatures can pop out of the sea and look at the landmarks up above the water. There's also, they can use the sun or stars as compasses like humans used to do. Some animals can use the magnetism of the earth to find their way, and others can follow little scent or chemical trails. Timing. So, first of all, timing in animals, so that's ectograms and things that go along with that. So there's different words you need to know for this. So you need to know about what the rhythm of the animal is, and the rhythm is how often it's doing the activity. And so they always start with circa. It might be circa annual, which is every year, circa tidal, which is about every tide, circadian is about every day. Then the type of activity, you want to say whether they're active at nighttime or daytime, or they might be crepuscular, active in the morning and the evening. Then this is where you'll talk about endogenous rhythm. So that's when we have an internal biological clock that if you took away any environmental clues, it would keep running. That's called the free running period. Most organisms have this because it's useful. It also synchronizes itself with external cues in the environment, which is called a Zeitgeber, that fun word. And you can remember the benefits of this by remembering pass. So P is for they predict. They can predict because of the external clues and in sync with the endogenous clock. They can predict that when they need to sort of wake up and get ready. They anticipate those changes that are going to happen, and they can synchronize their own body physiology to get ready, and they can also synchronize their social activity. So doing something all at the same time and coordinating with other animals in your social group can be really helpful. Sometimes you'll be shown an ectogram, which is just a graph that shows when animal is active. It will have dark bars on it, and that's when they're active. And then they'll keep them in normal conditions where it's, changing day to night or something like that. And then they'll change it and make it in constant conditions so the animal no longer has those external clues, but it will still keep a sort of a rhythm, but it will shift the time a little bit each day. And that's just an evidence of the fact that it has an internal rhythm that keeps going. And then you can talk about why they're important by doing this. Okay, plant timing. So Plants use photoperiodism, so photo meaning light, periodism meaning a period of time. So they use the length of day and night to time things, for example, timing flowering. So long day plants know when the night is short, and once the night becomes short enough, they will flower. And then short day plants know how long the night is as well, and when the night gets long enough, so they're long night plants, the nights get long enough, then they will flower. And how do they know this, and how do we know it's the night time that's important, not the day? They use a system called phytochrome. So phytochrome red is just a chemical, a pigment, can change into phytochrome far red, and in the daytime it will change from that particular version of it to this version very quickly. And so over the day, all of it changes into phytochrome far red. Overnight, it'll change from far red slowly back into red. And so that's how they time how long the night is, because if only some of it's changed back, that means the night was quite short. If lots of it or all of it's changed back, then the night was long. That's the basis of that one. And then we've just got interspecific and intraspecific. So interspecific is the interactions and the responses between different species. And there's three big ones. There's also one called commensalism and one called amensalism. And there, you don't really need to know those, they're not in the standard, but you might see them in some of your books. And that's when something is negative or positive for one and has no effect on the other one, but they're not so common in real life. The key three ones you have to know about is exploitation, competition, and mutualism. So exploitation can be, excuse me, I'm talking too much. It means it's positive for one of the species, negative for the other one. So herbivory is when something eats a plant, so negative for the plant. Predation is when a predator eats prey, and parasitism is when a parasite feeds off its host. So obviously bad for the thing that's being eaten. Competition is negative for both. Some people think that it's good for one and negative for the other one, but it's actually not. If you're both competing for something, it's actually bad for both of you because you're using up energy and there won't be enough resources for both of you. So if you're competing with your guinea pig, there's not going to be that much competition because your guinea pig is little, eats grass, doesn't really need the same things that you do. But if you are competing with your dog, for example, it might be that you were fighting over the same food and you did need the same sort of conditions or warmth or whatever. So it might be a bit worse. So the closer the thing is to you and the more it's fighting for the same resources, the worse that competition will be. And mutualism is when it's beneficial for both, which is very nice. So when bees get nectar from flowers and also benefits the flower by pollinating them. A win-win, as we say. And the last part is intraspecific, which means within the same species. This is actually more intense competition, which is also a bit counterintuitive, but it's a bit like, you're both fighting over the same piece of cake or taking the same person to the ball or whatever. Because you're competing for exactly the same things, the competition is actually more intense. This is minimized by doing things like some species will make calls, say birds, they'll have a call saying, hey, get away, this is my stuff. And if a competitor gets too close, they might ruffle their feathers or puff themselves up or flap their wings. If they get really close, they'll do a ritualized fight where they're like pretending to fight, but they're not really hurting the other one. And if none of those work, then they'll actually fight. But actual fighting is damaging to both the person fighting and the person being fought. And so they try to avoid actually fighting if they don't need to. They can conserve their energy. A hierarchy is another thing that's used in groups of the same species. So this is when, the higher up ones get the best mates, the best food, the best conditions, whatever. But they still help the ones lower down the food chain, as we call it, because they still get access to some food. It's easier for them to find the food, and they have some protection from being in a group. So there's advantages to living in a group situation. And then in this section is also territories. Now territories are areas where, so I'll move back over to our circles. We're going to go to that, and we're going to say this is now the territory of these animals. So these orange animals all live in here, and their territories, but they will actively defend. They will fight off anybody else that's going to try to come into their territory. Usually their babies are born in here, their food supply is in here, and they will fight to stop anybody coming into their territory. A home range is something that's usually a little bit wider than the territory, and it's where these animals will go out to find more food or explore. It's usually finding food, but they will venture out further than their territory to find things, but they don't actively defend their home range. They only defend their territory, but they will go out into a home range. So cooperative behaviour between members of the same species is great because you can get more food, you can defend yourselves against other things coming to get you. You can help each other bring up your young. So cooperation between members of the same species is good. Also courtship is important. Courtship rituals mean there's sort of safer bonding and more success of raising young. And so courtship helps you find, make sure it's a member of your same species, you recognise them, and make sure that they're a fit individual, and it can help with pair bonding. When you really need both parents to be raising the young, then having a good long courtship is good because you know you can trust them to help you feed the babies, essentially. And finally, some reproductive strategies that species use are this K strategies and R strategies. I think of K as standing for care. So these are species where they have just a very few young, but they care for them a lot. That's like humans. Obviously, we do that to the extreme. And then an R strategy, you can think of R as in risky or R as in ridiculous numbers. So these species instead have lots and lots and lots of young, but then they just leave them to fend for themselves, and lots of them die. But some of them will survive. So less energy input into caring for them. They just make a lot of them instead. And that is that. And I'll make another wee video of some real life examples. Hope that wasn't too much talking. Bye.